Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing ghost stories from Wyoming. Let's get into it. Story 1. It started on August 15th. I felt like someone was watching me, which is not unusual in my home. It is active with a very specific spirit who I believe to be an owner of the house and is very particular of how he likes things arranged and moved around the house without malice or intent. My home was built in the 1920s. The new spirit or spirits is different. At first it was just a glimpse of white eyes peeking through a window. The following morning I measured and they would have been 5 feet for their eyes to line up with the edge of the window. I checked for footprints and any sign of disturbance as they would have had to been standing in my garden. On the evening of the 16th, my dog went and sat in the window and stared at these eyes for about 30 seconds before they blinked a few times and went away. This pattern followed for a few nights, at different times in the evening, in different windows. Every time I locked eyes with one, I felt overwhelming sorrow and sympathy. They don't feel threatening. This happened for a few nights. The evening of the 18th, I took some photos in my bedroom because I felt like I was being watched. I caught a photo of these eyes standing at about 4 or 3 feet right inside my doorway. Once again, I did not feel threatened, but more confused on how or why they had moved into my home. The next morning of the 19th, I spoke to a friend about it, as I had captured photos. She was very pessimistic about what the spirit could be and expressed her concern. She thinks the eyes are too far apart to be human. She thinks an animal spirit, but cannot explain the height. The evening of the 19th, there are 2 sets of eyes outside my window. Another set in the spare bedroom at 3 feet looking at me, making 3 visible pairs of eyes at this one time. I smudged the house this morning, hoping to push them outside. At 10 p.m., when I made this account to share my story and ask if anyone else has a similar experience, there are 5 pairs of eyes visible at one time, 1 pair inside the kitchen and 4 in the windows. I'm not frightened by them, but confused on why their activity grew exponentially over the course of 5 days. I tried to contact them, speak to them, and ask them what is wrong, and they continue just to stare and blink. They never stay more than 45 seconds or a minute. I only see them once an evening, excluding the pair I saw in my bedroom. Story 2. To be honest, I do not know that this is paranormal in any way, but it's been going on for so long now and so consistently, and has been produced 1 or 2 rather terrifying incidents that I'm wondering if it is more than just a 3-year-old imagination. My youngest son, the only one that lives with my ex-wife and I, has been saying that he sees a bird or birds in his room at night for about the last 1.5 years or 2 years now. We recently moved from one end of town to another, and on the night the move started, the worst experience of all happened. My wife and I were woken from a dead sleep by my son screaming bloody murder. I can't remember offhand right now exactly what he said, but when we asked him what was wrong, I remember him mentioning the bird above his bed. There was and is nothing above his bed. I have placed a guardian angel and a blessed icon of St. Anne and Our Lady above his bed. This seems to have mitigated things, but he still sees this bird. We thought that it might be the fact that our old apartment was built above an old municipal pool, but the building we live in now was finished last August 2014. I still can't dismiss the fact that both my wife and I are currently full-time students, and this may be a way for him to get our attention, but that would suggest to me that he would be doing this every night. He is not. He also had little to no trouble sleeping a few weeks ago due to being sick, well, except the night he woke up 3 or 4 times to throw up. Has anyone else had this happen to their child? And if so, what have you done about it? Story 3. I was truly never a spiritually inclined child, but to be honest, I can't really say otherwise, being I have very few memories from my childhood. About 8 years ago, my father moved to a remote area in Wyoming. What area in Wyoming is not remote? I don't know. And I have lived there ever since. After about 3 of those 8 years had passed by, he acquired a new job at a private estate at the foot of a large, uncut forest. The owners of this private estate are absent for 10 months out of the year, leaving 6 log cabins and 3 mansions behind them to live in an even larger estate in Texas. I tell you one thing, nothing is creepier than those mansions at midnight. They are adorned with every Native American or Inuit statue that you can possibly think of, not to mention the overabundance of small rooms, cupboards, and even cabinets that open into mirrors. My family is known for its variety. My uncle supposedly saw an Indian spirit up on a mountain not far from there. He had a history of that, and a history of mental illness in his side of the family, so no one ever believed him, despite what he said. That is, until I was 12. My father let us play in the mansions when the masters were gone for the long time, and he trusted me with being careful of all the expensive paintings and some dull weapons that definitely would be of no use at all in any situation. I was a kid, and kids do tend to make imaginary friends. Not that night, but my young friend and I were infamous for upturning every small opening in an unknown area. And that we did that night when the adults were staying in a house not more than 100 yards away. When you are 12-ish, tired and completely warm and snug in your bed, and are used to the lights turned off, you don't notice the things like footsteps and lights turning on and off. The pinball machine was in action, and my friend Sarah was sipping on her pop when we both get the classic hair standing up on the back of our necks. Then the lights flash off, creaks resonate through the house, and we feel completely unsafe, like at any moment the statues on the walls would peel off and turn their heads to look at us. We abandoned our pops and ran for the closest corner we could find. A small room with an enclosed door was in our sight, and we ran for it. But inside, the lights were on, and a reflection shone lightly off the tan-colored window shades. Yes, the varnished shades shone the reflection of a man in a light brown-colored clothing. We ran for it. The day after, while all the lights were on in the middle of the day, Sarah and I finally made it to the basement and were promptly finding cupboards to open. Seconds later, I hear a scream. Running over to assist Sarah, I see the same sight, an obsidian knife decorated with a red feather plume hitting the ground. We slammed the door shut and ran, but when we returned, it was gone. I tried to avoid that house for a couple of years. I never told my parents, but rather kept the experience to myself. Then 1 or 2 years ago, oddly enough, the daughter or son of the owners had actually had an exorcism performed that year due to their own suspicions of a visit from the dead. The strange thing is, the house was only about 9 years old, but hey, we have had our share of deaths in that area, by hunting accident or bears, etc. Just goes to show you anything can happen. Maybe my uncle wasn't as crazy as we thought. Story 4. Every year when I was a kid, my family, Dad, Mom, me, and little sister, went to Wyoming to see our friends. They lived at a farmhouse with a huge yard and a ranch, so I loved going there. The only thing that freaked me out was its history. Their house was 200 years old and had a graveyard in their property. They had so many stories of seeing things, figures showing up in pictures, and hearing talking, laughing, singing, etc. In the graveyard there were a few children, so I think they have something to do with this story. My sister, my friend Grace, and I were sitting on the back porch talking. They had a big wrap around the porch, and we were sitting on the corner. It was a hot day with very little if no breeze. We were eating ice creams as we were talking when the back door suddenly flew open and started opening and closing really fast. The opening was facing us, and there was no hand. By the way it was moving, it would be impossible for the wind to be doing this, even if it was a very windy day, but there was no wind at all. We stared at it in shock for a couple of seconds, then screamed, dropped our ice creams, and ran around to the front where everyone was there. No one was missing. That same day, the 3 of us were sitting in the same spot talking about ghosts. Grace was saying how she could tell when they were near. Me and my sister just looked at each other thinking, yeah, right. Grace went to take a drink. She saw there was a bug in the drink. She put down her glass and said, ew, there's a bug in here. Then suddenly the glass flew off the deck as if something had pushed. Again, the way it had done, it was impossible to have been the wind. Our prediction was that it was one of the ghost kids playing a prank on us. We don't know what it was, but that's all we think it was, and we know it wasn't the wind. Story 5. I've always been receptive to spirits since as long as I can remember. I also sometimes dream of them and dream of things that have happened or are going to happen, but in no way do I consider myself psychic. Here's one experience that might creep you out, and I'm curious about other people's conclusions. When I was 5 years old, my dad took my 2 brothers and me on a road trip shortly after he and my mom divorced. We'd often drive for long hours without stopping, touring sites until we grew tired and stopped to camp. Since my dad wasn't exactly the richest man in the world at the time, he'd find places for us to camp where there were no camping fees. Sometimes we'd have to forego public camping sites altogether and drive down lonely dirt roads secluded from the highway. This was one such occasion. Near the base of the Beartooth Mountains, he drove his truck many miles down a dirt road, passing a ranch holding roaming buffalo within. Finally, he found the spot where he wanted us to place up for the night, nestled within the pine trees. We set up the camp, roasted hot dogs, and finally went to bed. I was walking through the forest. It was day. I was alone. I noticed that the trees were tall and thin, and not pine trees. There wasn't any undergrowth, just the soft ground. And then I stopped. I was staring at one very large, flat rock buried beneath the dirt, only the top surface of it exposed. Noticing this, I looked up to see a tall, pale woman with long, dark hair wearing a stained white dress, like a nightgown, standing several feet in front of me. She was talking, or at least I could see her mouth moving, but no sound or words came out. I asked her if she was okay, but as soon as I did, she began screaming. It was one long, drawn-out, high-pitched scream that never seemed to end. She never moved away from the rock, pointing at it. My dad woke me up. It was the morning, and we were already running behind. He needed to fix breakfast for us fast, so he asked me and my brothers to collect firewood to help him get started. I ran behind my brothers, who ran deeper and deeper into the forest. We ran into an area where there wasn't any underbrush. No good, because there weren't any sticks on the ground either. They ran on, but I didn't follow them. I stopped because I was in the same place as my dream the night before. I'd already seen the large, flat, moss-covered rock in front of me. Suddenly, I realized I was alone. Terrified that the screaming woman would appear, I hightailed it out of there and returned to my dad, waiting for my brothers to return. The dream has stuck in my mind ever since. Story 6. In September of 2005, I was transferred for work to Riverton, Wyoming. I found a nice little 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a small apartment complex. I got everything unpacked and set up just how I wanted it. I never felt quite comfortable in the apartment, but I just figured it was because it was my first time being away from home and living by myself. I had many strange things happen in the apartment, like the lights or TV being off when I knew I'd turned them on, but I just ignored them. I continued to tell myself it was all in my head. I would pass the time by going to coworkers' houses or talking on the phone to my friends and family. Finally, something happened. One night in November 2005 caused me to no longer be able to ignore all the strange happenings in the apartment. I had my room set up with my bed under a window in the middle of the room, with my dresser on one side and my vanity on the other side. There was a ceiling fan above my bed that I always used to pull at the string and turn the light on and off, so I did not have to walk across the room in the dark to get into bed. I went to bed around 10 o'clock that night. I fell asleep easily that night and did not wake up until around 3 a.m., when I woke up to a girl sitting on the stand in front of my vanity. She was young, probably around 20. She had very long black hair and was wearing a long white nightgown. When I woke up, she turned around and said her name was Emily Baumgarten. I'm not sure of the spelling on the last name, but that is how it sounded, and this was her room. I freaked out and started to scream, jumped up on my bed and pulled the chain on the light, and then she was gone. I saw Emily one more time about a month later. I'd gotten 2 cats to help me not feel so alone and uncomfortable at home. I was woken up at 3 a.m. by my cats freaking out. When I opened my eyes, I saw Emily hovering over top of me. I could not move or scream. I just stared at her. After what seemed to be an hour, but I am sure it was just a few seconds, she vanished. After the second time I had a run-in with Emily, I could no longer live in that apartment. I found a new place to live and moved out. I have not seen her since. I asked around to see if anyone knew anything about my apartment or that name. No one had any idea why these things had happened. I sometimes wonder about what caused Emily to become a ghost and why she made herself known to me. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.